Imagine you are Iran's foreign minister. Last week you flew to Beijing. You sat with Wang Yi, China's top diplomat, one of the most powerful foreign policy officials in the world. He reaffirmed China's strategic partnership with Iran. He expressed China's support for Iran's sovereignty. He urged continued diplomacy but signaled Beijing's continued commitment to the relationship. You flew home thinking, China is still with us. The most important economic relationship Iran has, the one that keeps our oil money flowing despite Western sanctions, the one that has kept our government funded through years of American pressure, is solid. Then, 48 hours later, you turn on the news. Donald Trump is in Beijing. He's sitting with Xi Jinping in the Great Hall of the People. They're talking about Iran. And here is what Xi Jinping tells Trump. China will not give Iran military weapons. China agrees that the Strait of Hormuz must remain open. China opposes any Iranian tolling system for ships passing through Hormuz. China agrees Iran can never have a nuclear weapon. And, Xi tells Trump personally, China would love to be of help in brokering a deal. You are Iran's foreign minister, and you are reading statements that 1 week ago you thought were impossible. Your insurance policy just started canceling itself. Your most important ally just told the world's most powerful country, the country that is at war with you, that China agrees with America on the two core issues of this conflict. Welcome to May 15th, 2026, the day China changed sides. This is that story. Part 1. The relationship that made this possible, and the one that just changed. To understand the magnitude of what happened today, you need to understand the China-Iran relationship. Because this is not a simple story of distant countries with overlapping interests. This is a deep, transactional, strategically calculated partnership that has been building for years, and that Iran has depended on for survival. In March 2021, China and Iran signed a 25-year comprehensive cooperation agreement, sometimes called the Iran-China deal in Western media. The agreement covered trade, infrastructure, energy, and security cooperation. Under its terms, China would invest up to $400 billion in Iran over 25 years in exchange for guaranteed access to Iranian oil at discounted rates. It was the most significant international agreement Iran had signed in decades, and it was specifically designed to give Iran an alternative to Western economic integration, a way to survive and even thrive despite American sanctions. Since then, China has become Iran's lifeline. Chinese companies have purchased Iranian oil through complex transaction structures specifically designed to evade U.S. sanctions. Shadow tankers, shell companies, transaction routing through non-dollar financial systems. All designed to get Chinese money to Iranian government accounts without triggering American penalties. The result? Iran's oil revenues have continued despite what the United States calls maximum pressure. The Iranian government has remained funded. The nuclear program has continued. The proxy network, Hezbollah, the Houthis, Iraqi militias, has remained supported. None of that would have been possible without China, and Iran knew it. That's why Tehran has spent years cultivating the relationship. Iranian officials travel to Beijing regularly. Iran has positioned itself as a key node in China's Belt and Road Initiative. Iran has made itself useful to China, a reliable oil supplier, a strategic foothold in the Middle East, a partner in resisting American global hegemony. That relationship was Iran's trump card. Until today. Part 2. Last week, Iran tried to lock in Chinese support. The timing of what happened this week makes today's betrayal, and that's not too strong a word, even more striking. Just last week, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi flew to Beijing. This was not a routine diplomatic visit. This was a strategic mission, timed specifically to coincide with Trump's upcoming visit to China. Iran wanted to get to Beijing first, to talk to Wang Yi before Trump talked to Xi, to shape China's position before the U.S. could. The message Iran delivered to Beijing was essentially this: we need you to stay neutral or supportive. Don't let Trump pressure you into siding with America on Hormuz or nuclear weapons. The strategic partnership matters. Honor it. Wang Yi's response was careful. He reaffirmed the strategic partnership. He urged diplomatic resolution. He used language that Iran could interpret as supportive. Iran left Beijing last week thinking it had shored up Chinese support. It is now clear that what Iran got from Wang Yi was diplomatic politeness, not strategic commitment. Because when Trump arrived in Beijing, with real economic leverage, with a trade deal framework, with the full weight of American diplomatic and economic power, Xi Jinping made a different calculation. And Iran is learning today what that calculation was. Part 3. Trump in Beijing, the summit that changed everything. Let me walk you through exactly what happened at the Trump-Xi summit, because the details are extraordinary. Trump arrived in Beijing on May 13, 2026. He brought an unprecedented business delegation: Elon Musk of Tesla, Jensen Huang of NVIDIA, Tim Cook of Apple. These are the CEOs of companies with massive economic stakes in the U.S.-China relationship, a signal from Trump that this visit was about the full spectrum of American economic interests, not just geopolitics. The summit took place at the Great Hall of the People on May 14th. More than 2 hours of direct talks. Then a state banquet, Xi hosting Trump in one of the most elaborate diplomatic settings in Chinese protocol. Trump even invited Xi to the White House for September 24th. On the substance, the two leaders covered trade, technology, Taiwan, and Iran. On Iran, the White House readout was specific, detailed, and consequential. Quote 1. The two sides agreed that the Strait of Hormuz must remain open to support the free flow of energy. This is a joint American-Chinese position, officially stated. The world's two largest economies have now agreed in writing that Iran's closure of the strait is unacceptable. Quote 2. President Xi also made clear China's opposition to the militarization of the strait and any effort to charge a toll for its use. Iran has been attempting to formalize its control of the strait through a tolling system, charging ships for passage through what international law considers a global waterway. China just publicly said no. Iran's tolling system is dead on arrival from its most important potential supporter. Quote 3. Both countries agreed that Iran can never have a nuclear weapon. This is perhaps the most significant statement of all. China has long maintained a studied ambiguity on Iran's nuclear program, not endorsing weaponization, but also not strongly opposing Iran's enrichment activities. Today, China moved from ambiguity to explicit agreement with the American position. And then, on Fox News after the summit, Trump revealed the most personal and dramatic moment. He said, "I would love to be a help if I can be of any help whatsoever," Trump quoted Xi. China's president personally offered to help broker the end of a war being fought against its most important Middle Eastern oil supplier. That is not a minor diplomatic gesture, that is a fundamental shift. Part 4. The weapons bombshell. That's a big statement. Now let's talk about the specific detail that Trump himself called a big statement. Xi Jinping told Donald Trump that China will not provide military equipment to Iran. He said he's not going to give military equipment, Trump told Fox News. That's a big statement. Trump's instinct is right. It is a big statement. Here's why. Iran's military has been degraded by U.S. and Israeli strikes since February 28, 2026. Operation Epic Fury targeted military bases, air defense systems, ammunition depots, and command infrastructure. Iran's ability to project force, always dependent on a complex mix of domestic manufacturing, Russian technology, and international procurement, has been damaged. As the war has continued, Iran has been looking for ways to replenish its military capabilities. Russia has been one potential source. North Korea, which has sold ammunition and drones to Russia for use in Ukraine, has been another. But China, with its vast defense manufacturing capacity and its existing relationship with Iran, was always the most concerning potential supplier. China has sophisticated weapons systems, advanced electronics, drone technology, missile components, anti-ship weapons. If China decided to support Iran militarily, even through arms transfers that didn't cross the threshold of direct combat involvement, it could significantly change the military balance in the conflict. By assuring Trump that China will not provide military equipment to Iran, Xi has removed that option, at least publicly, at least explicitly. There are caveats. Trump's assurance was narrowly worded, military equipment specifically. Questions remain about electronics with dual civilian military uses, about intelligence sharing, about the many ways technology can flow between countries without being formally classified as weapons. U.S. Secretary of State Rubio acknowledged these limits when he said, China had also reiterated its opposition to Iran's developing nuclear weapons. Careful diplomatic language that doesn't claim China has completely cut off all forms of support. But the public statement matters, because it establishes a standard. It gives the United States and the world something to hold China to. If Chinese weapons are later found in Iranian hands, Beijing has explicitly violated a commitment made to the American president in Beijing. That accountability is new. That accountability is significant. And Iran is now on the wrong side of a Chinese commitment made to its enemy. Part 5. Why China did this. Follow the money and the oil. Let's be precise about China's motivations. Because Xi Jinping is not acting out of principle, he is acting out of interest. And understanding those interests explains everything. Interest number 1. China needs the Strait of Hormuz open, desperately. China is the world's largest crude oil importer. It imports more than half its crude from the Middle East. Most of that oil travels through the Strait of Hormuz. Since Iran closed the strait in March, China has been paying more for rerouted energy. Oil is being shipped around the Cape of Good Hope, adding weeks to every voyage, dramatically increasing shipping costs. Chinese refineries that depend on consistent Gulf supply have been facing disruptions. Chinese energy costs have risen. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent was blunt from Beijing. China has a much bigger interest in reopening the strait than the U.S. does. He's right. The U.S. produces enough domestic oil to largely buffer against a Middle East supply disruption. China does not. China's economy runs on Gulf crude. Every day the strait stays closed costs China more than it costs America. Interest number 2. China does not want a nuclear-armed Iran. This might seem counterintuitive, China opposing Iranian nuclear weapons. But think about it from Beijing's perspective. A nuclear-armed Iran triggers a Middle Eastern arms race. Saudi Arabia has said it will pursue nuclear weapons if Iran gets them. Turkey has made similar noises. Egypt, potentially others. A nuclear Middle East destabilizes the entire region where China has invested hundreds of billions in infrastructure projects. A nuclear-armed Iran also gives the United States permanent justification to maintain a massive military presence in the Gulf, the largest and most expensive military infrastructure in a region where China is trying to expand its own influence. China doesn't want the U.S. military anchored in the Gulf forever. A non-nuclear Iran, under a deal, makes that more achievable. Interest number 3. China wants leverage over both sides. By offering to help broker a deal, if I can be of any help whatsoever, China positions itself as an indispensable mediator. A mediator has leverage over both parties. China can extract concessions from the U.S. on trade and Taiwan in exchange for pushing Iran toward a deal. China can extract concessions from Iran on oil pricing and investment access in exchange for Chinese diplomatic cover. This is not altruism. This is the most sophisticated form of transactional diplomacy. But for Iran, the consequence is the same regardless of China's motivations. China just said, "We want Hormuz open. We agree you can't have nukes, and we won't give you weapons." Part 6. Iran's response and why it's impossible. Let's talk about where this leaves Iran. Iran's position, as articulated repeatedly by its parliament speaker, foreign ministry, and president, is that the U.S. has no choice but to accept Iran's 14-point proposal. That proposal includes Iranian sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz, the right to charge tolls for passage, nuclear talks deferred entirely, war reparations from the United States, an end to all sanctions. Every single one of those demands has just become harder to maintain. Iranian sovereignty over Hormuz? China just said the strait must remain open for the free flow of energy and opposed any tolling system. Nuclear talks deferred? China just agreed with the U.S. that Iran can never have a nuclear weapon. War reparations and sanctions. China isn't supporting these demands publicly. Iran's negotiating position was built on the assumption that China would provide diplomatic cover. that Iran's demands would be softened in Western eyes by Chinese neutrality or quiet support. China wasn't going to publicly oppose Iran's position. That assumption is now wrong. Iran President Masoud Pezeshkian said earlier this week, "We will never bow our heads before the enemy." That's rhetoric. And rhetoric doesn't open straits or fund governments. The economic reality is stark. Iran's oil revenue remains Iran's primary income source. China buys nearly all of that oil. China has just aligned itself publicly with the two American demands that Iran has been refusing. Open the strait, halt the nuclear program. Iran can continue to resist, but it is doing so increasingly alone. The international isolation that Western sanctions tried to create and that China's continued oil purchases prevented from being complete just became more real. Part 7. The Market Signal. What the Dow is telling us. Here's a moment from today that deserves its own analysis. For the first time since the Iran war began on February 28, 2026, the Dow Jones Industrial Average closed above 50,000 points. 50,063, up 370 points on the day. The first time above 50,000 since the war sent markets tumbling more than 10 weeks ago. Why does this matter? Because financial markets are not political. They don't care about flag-waving or diplomatic face-saving. They care about what's likely to happen in the future, filtered through the judgment of millions of traders and investors. And today, those millions of traders and investors looked at the Trump-Xi summit, looked at China agreeing that Hormuz must open, that Iran can't have nukes, that China would love to help broker a deal, and they made a collective decision. They decided things just got better. Not perfect, not solved. The strait is still closed. The ceasefire is still on life support. Iran's foreign minister is still saying Iran will never bow. The war is not over. But the probability of resolution, the probability that this ends in a deal rather than a decade-long stalemate, just increased. China entering as an active force for resolution, rather than a passive enabler of Iranian resistance, is the single most significant development for global energy markets since the war began. The Dow at 50,000 is the market saying, "We see a path." Oil prices, which had been elevated throughout the war, pulled back slightly on the news. Not dramatically, the strait is still largely closed. But the direction shifted. The market's verdict on today's Beijing summit, this changes something real. Part 8. What happens next? The race against time. Here's the honest assessment of where things stand after today. China has moved. That is real and significant. But China's move is a beginning, not an ending. What matters now is what China actually does behind the scenes. U.S. Treasury Secretary Bessent said China would work behind the scenes to the extent anyone has any say over the Iranian leadership. To the extent anyone has any say is a careful caveat. Because here's the truth about China's leverage over Iran. China buys Iran's oil. That gives China leverage. But Iran knows that China also needs that oil. The leverage runs in both directions. Iran can threaten, implicitly or explicitly, to stop selling to China, to pivot to other partners, to complicate China's energy security if Beijing gets too aggressive in pressuring Tehran. Iran is not completely powerless. It has a nuclear program that China does not want destroyed in a way that creates chaos. It has regional proxies that could threaten Chinese investments across the Middle East. It has the ability to create instability in ways that hurt Chinese interests, even as China tries to pressure it. The leverage relationship is asymmetric. China has more cards. But Iran is not without cards. The next 72 hours are critical. If Chinese officials, through private channels, through the Iran-China relationship, through signals that don't appear in press releases, communicate to Tehran that the game has changed, Iran may move. If China's public statements are matched by private pressure, the negotiating dynamic shifts. If China's statements remain public positions without private follow-through, if Beijing is managing its relationship with Washington without actually pressuring Tehran, then today is less significant than it appears. The world will be watching Iran's next move very carefully. Closing. The moment Iran lost its trump card. Let me close with the image that defines today. 1 week ago, Iran's foreign minister sat in Beijing with Wang Yi. He left thinking China was in his corner. He left thinking the strategic partnership was holding. He left thinking Iran's insurance policy was intact. Today, in the same city, Donald Trump sat with Xi Jinping, and Xi Jinping told Trump that China wants the Strait of Hormuz open, that Iran cannot have nuclear weapons, that China won't give Iran military equipment, that China would love to help broker a deal. Iran lost its trump card in Beijing. Not completely. China is still buying the oil. The 25-year cooperation agreement is still technically in place. The economic relationship hasn't ended. But something fundamental changed today. China shifted from passive enabler to active participant, from strategic ambiguity to explicit agreement with the American position on the two most critical issues of this war. Iran thought China was its ally. China just told the world what it actually wants. Hormuz open, no nuclear weapons, no military support, and a deal. And Iran, for the first time since February 28, 2026, has no answer.